Enjoy, guys.
Awesome. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining today again. And my name is again Piyush Kant. I am a senior identity solutions advisor or sales engineer at SailPoint. I've been in the identity space for over 10 years now, where most of my time was spent in implementation consulting capacity. Today, I plan to talk about why do you need to rethink your identity program as you take down the path of digital transformation, and provide you with some high-level building blocks to plan your identity strategy. You all can see my screen, right?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. So here's a quick agenda that I have in mind. So I'll touch on the evolution of identity. We're going to then move into debunking some of the confusions that's spreading around identity management. I will then give some bullet points on how you can plan your identity strategy. And then we'll actually get into setting some high-level strategic goals. And then the most crucial part is how do you pick the right identity partner? And then we'll break out for questions and answers. So identity has been around for quite some time. In the beginning, it used to be basic provisioning, which ensured that people got access to the applications that they needed, especially when they got onboarded. However, as organizations take the path of digital transformation, they have introduced many new variables. As a result, it has become overwhelming for the IT to keep up. These new variables include more user types to manage in addition to your regular full-time employees, maybe contractors, think it's partners, and even non-human employees such as your RPAs, bots. More applications are coming online every day. As a result, more sensitive data are being stored across various repositories, both cloud and on-premise. And with the increasing multi-cloud infrastructure, it has become more and more difficult to gain visibility across your different workloads. So this explosion of data has put identity at the center of security. And there has never been more critical time for organizations to rethink their identity program and take a more centralized governance-based approach across their security ecosystem. So it doesn't really matter which stage are you at, you need to be able to answer these three critical questions around your security ecosystem, which are who has access to what, who should have access, and how is that access being used? As an example, if you're using an ITSM or a privilege management system or GRC, you should be able to have the entire visibility across the accounts from a centralized system. And you should be able to tell why is these accounts being assigned to whoever it is assigned to, and so forth. So as the executives realize the value proposition of identity governance, it has risen to the top of the CIO's priority in the last 5 years. While it was already at the top of the list, we got hit by this global pandemic that completely changed the way we work. Now we're living in a world of distributed employees. So fixing identity governance is something that needs to be done right now rather than a near-term objective. And as we have resolved the traditional security parameters, identity has become this new firewall and the leading attack vector. More frequently, hackers now target users instead of targeting companies' internal network, because all they need is to exploit one digital identity to breach a company's entire network. And considering the number of digital identities an enterprise might have who are accessing these different set of applications with varying level of permissions, an enterprise could have millions of exposure points in their systems. And now it's no more a matter of if, it's when that breach will happen. So for the same reason, having a solid identity governance program is more important than ever. So we understand that the current working scenarios has changed. The governance is pretty important. So what's the problem, right? It should be pretty simple, right? Well, the problem is that there's a lot of confusion that's floating around due to lack of understanding of identity. That has led to creating some myths around identity management. So let's debunk some of these myths around identity management. So the first one is, you must have heard people say, you're covered if you have access management, right? Well, that's not true. Let's understand this with an example. So here's I have John. He's a sales rep. He has accounts in Salesforce, homegrown commissioning tool, Oracle PeopleSoft, but his access to Salesforce should be restricted to the territory that he's assigned to. As an example, he is assigned to the US West territory, so he should only be able to access the US West accounts to close a deal. In the same fashion, he should be able to view his commissions, but should not be able to calculate his commissions or be able to approve them. This falls on the line of separation of duty, which is required by Sarbanes-Oxley, a SOX, or known as SOX compliance, which most of the organization needs to comply these days. And finally, he should be able to see his pay and benefits in the company HR portfolio, but not be able to process commissions to pay a payroll, right? Now, the first on the top portion, which grants access to these systems, is access management. But it's incomplete without those granular controls that we just talked about. That's where identity governance comes into the equation to make sure that the right people has the right access to do their job. And identity governance is not just granting access, it's way more than that. It's about making sure that the people are able to do their job without causing risk to the entire organization. Now let's look at the second myth. Well, provisioning is simple, we can do that. Most of the organizations think that it's quite simple, right? Well, it's not true. Let's try to understand this from a previous example, right? So here's John, right? He has access to these two applications that we talked about, but we just found out that he also has access to ServiceNow. Now, can your current provisioning workflow track from beginning to end exactly when, how, and why an account was created for him in ServiceNow? Did it came from through an access request? Can you track that access request, or can you track the approvers who approved that request? What kind of access does he have in ServiceNow? Is it a privileged account? And if it is, when was his last access being reviewed? Is John's access an outlier compared to his peers? Your current provisioning platform should be able to answer these questions. And not just that, it should be able to provide you an audit trail that ties to the entire access request process that can be submitted to your auditors, right? So it's not as simple as it sounds. The last one that I want to touch on this, you don't need governance, that's just an audit thing, right? Well, no. While identity governance helps your organization comply with the audit requirements, it also provides a variety of other business and security value. Excuse me. Starting with your automated joiner mover lifecycle, it provides a significant operational efficiency. It reduces burden from your IT by giving the users a self-service interface for password or application management. With role-based policy controls, it prevents your organization from data breaches. It also mitigates insider threats by doing periodic access reviews and a lot more, right? This gives your organization a major competitive advantage while you focus on what's important to you, that is your core business. Now let's switch gears and focus on how you can plan your organization's identity strategy. I understand it's not a simple task. So let's start with the basics. Let's first dive deeper into understanding what kind of identity types you are using in your current organization. So most of you must be comfortable with employees, right? But what are other human type population that you are using? Maybe contractors, consultants, customers, alumni. And in addition to that, what are some of the non-human population or identity that you might have, such as your service accounts, bots, RPAs? What are the employee life cycle, or not just employee life cycle, but the entire identity life cycle differ from each of these different identities? Does your employee have the same life cycle as your customers, volunteers? What are some of the core applications that they need access? So it's time to think about that and kind of keep that aside in the future to plan further on that. Also, what's the system of record that are used to actually house these identities? Maybe it's coming from the HR, typically all your employees, right? Are your contractors coming from the same system, or are you using spreadsheets? Where are your non-human population housed? Is it an LDAP database? So try to underline all these sources to figure out if there are any centralization opportunities to have one central system that can house all different identities. Now let's think it from a joiners movers flow. This is the core life cycle of an identity governance platform. How do you onboard your new employee? So that's what we call typically a joiner flow, where a new identity gets associated with an organization. So typically maybe a partner, maybe a customer, alumni, or even an employee, right? When the employee joins the organization, how do you provision these accounts? Is it manual, or what are some of the core applications that the user needs from day one? And then moving from day one, how does he request access to get further access if he needs moving away from the day one? And then when it gets to the mover stage, which is basically if that same identity transfers positions, maybe goes on leave of absence, or goes on the retiree stage, or maybe changes roles or job within the same position. How are you checking that his previous access are getting revoked and he's getting new accesses? Are you doing certification or access reviews during this process? What are your processes through that? And then same goes through a leaver flow where the identity gets disassociated with your organization and all its access are properly removed. So that's kind of giving you a head start on planning your life cycle towards the identity governance. Now let's get further deeper and look at your on-premise inventory. So we talked about, access management versus access governance briefly, right? So you need to think about your directories, your traditional Active Directory. How are users accessing this through? Maybe you are using a SSO provider like Okta's or MFA's, an FFS solution, or Azure Active Directory. How is that tying with your authorization versus how do you assign what access does each user have towards the groups, the different applications that you have? Are you tying that group with the current applications that you're using, or are users logging into those applications separately outside your Active Directory? What are your manual processes in terms of creating these accounts within these applications that you're using? Maybe you're using some automation. Maybe there's more need of providing more automated way, or maybe combining those groups and tying it with your current applications. And we do understand not all applications support Active Directory-based grouping. So you have to think about that. What are some of the policies, procedures that your steering committee might have set, and how it all ties together? The next thing is it's time to evaluating your cloud strategy. Where do you stand currently on your SaaS footprint? What's your PaaS or infrastructure as a service footprint? Are you a cloud-first organization, or are you multi-cloud where you're leveraging multiple IaaS solutions like GCP, Azure, and other solutions? Do you have real-time visibility across these cloud infrastructure? So it's time to think about all of that and understand exactly where cloud privileges are being used and which aren't, kind of helping you quickly get to and maintain to a least privilege model. On the same lines, does your cloud security team have the visibility into your DevOps access on these infrastructure workloads? Because that's a team who uses majority of the workloads in your infrastructure. You may have 400 people with access into your AWS and Azure, but do you exactly know what they have access to? Do you have a way to see exactly what people are doing and using across your AWS, your GCP infrastructure to kind of plan your future investments without slowing them down, right? You may think that you have visibility into this via your Active Directory, but what most of the organizations don't realize that the accounts within these workloads are not coming from your traditional Active Directory. It kind of works like as a local account on these workloads. So that's something to keep in mind. How are you tying that back to these identities? So that's quite important to think about. Now, by now, you must have gotten a good understanding of your current situation. So you got a good hand on that. Now, let's plan on some long-term initiative as the next step. So thinking strategically and acting tactically is the key. As an example, you might want to split it in multiple years initiative. Maybe you want to start with automated password reset on next year. Or maybe you want to start with privileged identity management next year and then push password resets to the later stage. The idea here is to set some kind of high-level strategic goals and use this as kind of a sample blueprint to guide you moving forward. Now, the next and most crucial step in this journey is to picking the right identity partner. Do your research. Here are some of the leading research advisory firms who do an extensive research on the top players in the identity space. And each of these research firms have different methodology that they use. Gartner, for example, conducts customer interviews and read reviews from around the employees as well as the customers, where Forrester actually does a kind of a bake-off between multiple identity players and tests the solutions, and then decide based on that, it takes the result. So it's kind of important on reading all of these reports and not just reading one. And this, by no means, again, giving you the final step in finalizing your identity partner. This kind of gives you a starting point to further perform your evaluation. And that, again, brings me to the partner evaluation piece. And that's in context to your organization, right? So which of these pictures in this slide looks most like you, right? Try to identify what ITSM solutions are you using, what PAM solution are you using. Maybe you're using one of these, right? And then identifying the solution providers that support these use cases and control across your application sets within your organization. So that's the key in actually choosing any of the partners that you decide to go with. Then again, tying it back to your strategy in terms of cloud. If you're a cloud-first organization, maybe you need to partner with a solution provider that has a cloud service. What are some of the APIs or plugins that the solution provider has that can hook up with your organization? So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how broad a solution provider has access to these different ecosystems, but tie it back to your specific need, right? Does it integrate with your specific ecosystem or not? And once you have identified a partner, try to scope out some quick wins. Quick tactical wins build relationships that enable you to further establish trust and while you plan your long-term strategic goals. So this again ties back to the thing that we planned on your strategic goals. Try to scope out as you move forward for your strategic planning and team that to your strategic high-level initiatives. And the last is, don't forget to celebrate during the process. As you are rolling this out, get some feedback from your employees, from your customers, and see how they're feeling. And if they're happy, just feel free to celebrate your achievements. And that is the end of my presentations. What questions or comments or other things that you want to discuss? Do we have any questions on the chat?
Yes, I'm looking through the chat. I don't see anything popping out, but question. Thanks for walking us through the presentation. I wondered, in your experience, we talked about the proliferation of applications and the migration to the cloud. For these solutions themselves, what's the balance of identity solutions being deployed on-premise or in the cloud?
So it actually typically depends, in two things, right? Where are you currently at your cloud journey? If you already are at where you want to migrate where you're already at a hybrid approach where you have certain applications into your cloud or versus on-premise, you might want to think, how does your cost structure is, like maybe OpEx versus CapEx? What's your priority towards that? And then deciding on that, we're going with a cloud or on-premise solution. If you're just on-premise, then trying to focusing on on-premise. So again, it all depends on your individual use case when you decide on choosing on-premise versus cloud.
Great, thanks.
Okay, you guys have a question. It says, Steve McGee says, can you give a common example of ABAC or ABAC?
Sure. So ABAC is basically attribute-based control. So, and RBAC is role-based control. So role is kind of the high level block of attributes. So say you take an example of your Active Directory. In your Active Directory, you might have different groups, and each groups might have some attributes. So those groups combine and make a role. And it might not just Active Directory. As an example, if someone is an IT analyst, he might have some entitlements that is assigned to him in the Active Directory or groups. He might also need some access into an SAP system or an Oracle EBS. Now, as part of his role, he has access to all these three applications. But entitlements is something that controls on a granular level what groups or what functions he needs from each of these three applications. But as his role, he needs to access all three entitlements together across these three applications. So some organizations I've seen take a granular approach of doing attribute-based control, and some do a role-based, and both have its positives and negatives there.
It's very common that we'll see enterprises deploy with a bit of both, right? It takes some time, perhaps, and some analysis to develop a role-based approach. And so understanding what attributes you can glean from a user or from an application can drive access controls as well. So a little bit of both.
Right.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions for our panelists today? Okay, none are coming in, guys. So, Piyush, you have a little bit more to go.
Yeah, no, I just want to throw in my information here. So yeah, feel free to hit me up if you have any questions after this session. Here's my LinkedIn as well as my email address. So if you have any questions on what we talked about later, this presentation will be shared as well. So yeah, feel free to reach me out. And thank you for joining